Good evening, Crypt Keepers, and welcome to Cryptique, where we discuss all things paranormal, occult, UFOs, metaphysical, hidden history, forbidden archaeology, all things truther, and sometimes the North Pole. I'm joined as always by everybody's favorite three-legged monster. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. It's a very flattering thing to say. I saw Tim Meadows, the ladies' man, last night at the Helium Comedy Club, so my mind is in the gutter.
There you go. There you go. I don't know. I don't picture you hopping around as much as the Enfield Monster, but we'll get to that later. You want to just run over what they need to know real quick?
Yeah, just quickly, if you guys want to support us, share the show with somebody you think will like it, interact with it through whatever platform you use. It helps us with the algorithm. You can donate to help keep the servers running at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. And one of the things we like the most is hearing from you guys. We want to know what you want to hear next, what you like, what you don't like, what corrections you have. And you can send that at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com.
Perfect. Ryan is batting leadoff tonight. What you got for us?
So I've been, I know we've kind of leaned away from a lot of paranormal stuff, but I've been really interested in like polar exploration. I've seen some documentaries about it, some videos, some articles, and you know, it's one of those things where it's a part of our planet that we don't really know particularly well. It was, not reached in its current state. Not to say that there weren't civilizations there when the Earth was different, thousands of years ago. But I mean, it was only 58 that the North Pole was successfully reached, like landed there and did meaningful things there. And that was by a submarine. So I was looking at some of these, and one of the ones that you and I talked about was Byrd's expedition. And this was a flight over the North Pole. And it's one of the more interesting stories.
Yeah.
So Richard Evelyn Byrd, who was born October 25th of 1888, so this is an old guy, was an American explorer, aviator, and a writer who became famous for these expeditions and was one of the most prominent figures in the history of Antarctic exploration during the early 1900s. During his early life, he lived in Winchester, Virginia, and grew up in Staten Island, New York. Graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, or Naval Academy at West Point, I guess I should say, with a degree in civil engineering. In World War I, he served as an officer in the U.S. Army, initially in the Coast Artillery Corps, and later transferring to the aviation section, as it's worth noting, as we have before, that there was not an Air Force back then. It was, Army Air Corps or whatever else they called aviation. And they flew reconnaissance missions over Europe and was involved in the development of certain bombing techniques during the war. Because, again, World War I, like planes, armored vehicles, like motor vehicles in general were relatively new. We were kind of still figuring out how to make weapons out of them. I mean, it was kind of a time in history where we were trying to figure out how can we make weapons out of this thing. So anyway, he read Robert Falcon Scott's account of one of his expeditions, and in 1926 became the first person to fly over I think it was the South Pole, aboard the USS Bear. And he also flew over the North Pole later that year. I don't have a date for the South Pole one. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I did find information that was not conflicting, but just not all the sources had the same stuff. But anyway, May 9th of 1926, he flew over the North Pole. Now, well, I guess we can continue with this before we get into what's particularly interesting about that. He had more Antarctic expeditions from 1933 to 35. In 33 was the most significant mission, where he established the first base at the South Pole and conducted scientific research. Now, I don't exactly know what constitutes a base at the South Pole, but I'm pretty sure it's nothing that you and I would consider a base.
Right, yeah.
I'm assuming this is a couple tents, maybe like a hewn log cabin, something like that. Like, it's it's not the kind of facilities that we have today. But
they roughed
anyway,
it.
They definitely did. They also discovered a large meteorite in the area.
Ooh.
He had a transatlantic flight in 1934 where he and Bernd Balken, I think is how you pronounce that, made the first transcontinental flight over the Antarctic continent on November 28th of 1934. They flew from Earhart Base in Antarctica to King George Island in the Palmer Archipelago. And then during World War II, he served as the chief of the office of the Chief of Naval Operations Air Plans Division.
Otherwise known as Sisakatidap.
Did I say that right? Chief of the office of the Chief of Naval Operations Air Plans Division. And he played a significant role in basically developing the Navy's aviation capabilities. And again, I think found excuses to go into the Arctic, as he went on a few expeditions looking for missing aircraft around that time. And after the war, he still continued to do these explorations, going into Greenland in 46, and going into Greenland in 46, and another one to Antarctica from 1955 to 56, but he passed away during one of these in an accident while attempting to fly over some mountains. But so well-known, famous, well-respected. A lot of people have probably heard of Byrd, even if they don't know, unless you're into jazz, then you might be thinking of a different Byrd. But one of the most interesting things from his expeditions was from the 1926 flight, which I believe was aboard a plane that some sources say was a Navy aircraft. Others say it was funded by Edsel Ford and named for his daughter, Josephine. So but the craft was apparently named the Josephine Ford, but it was some type of plane, like a 3-engine plane. They flew over the North Pole on May 9th, 1926, and found an area of open water that was surrounded by sea ice. And this is known as Byrd's ice-free Polonia, which apparently has its roots in Russian, as meaning like an area of clear water or open water, something like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, open water, clear pool. So it's obviously unique because it occurs so close to the geographic North Pole, which is pretty typically covered in ice.
Right.
And there's not as much about it as I would have thought. And again, I was curious to look into this using like Gemini and some of these other tools, because I do use Gemini in particular for fact checking every once in a while, just to say, does this make sense? Is this date right? Can you find me a source that confirms this? And usually it comes through. But yeah, some of the stuff like this, it's like, oh yeah, it's this area with no ice, but it's probably not real. It's probably a hoax. It's probably this. And it's like, but why did he say it? Where did he say it? And it was just
what would be his motivation to make it up?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing just to try to ask these AIs, because now I'm kind of into that, asking it about the weird stuff that we talk about, to be like, hey, what can you tell me about this? It's like, it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I know some of it is, but can you not tell me about it anyway? But anyway, what I found is that there are a couple theories about it. One is that methane hydrates that are, which I'm assuming are gases, beneath the seabed are, just essentially being released, and they're bubbling up through this area and just disturbing the water to the point where new ice doesn't form.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah, no super strong evidence for that theory. Another is ocean currents being responsible for keeping that open, and particularly the underwater currents that might kind of move warmer water around. But again, that seems strange because there's ice all around it. You would think you'd at least have surface ice or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not the same to compare like a pond in your backyard, but it can be, I don't know. I've seen ice form with like extreme wind and currents and things like that. Although we will get into another expedition where they did talk about discovering warmer water underneath the ice. So maybe there is something to that. Wind patterns. Some people talked about wind patterns potentially playing a role in maintaining this open area, that the winds and waves just essentially prevent it from happening.
Sure.
And then geothermal heat is the last of the kind of, what would you call them, like norm core explanations. Yeah, just that there's heat coming from, some kind of geothermic activity down below, some kind of hot spring or whatever that's causing heat to come up. But then we get into the good ones.
All right. Here we go. The cryptique explanations.
Yeah. So I got 5 of those too. Extraterrestrial activity. Theory suggesting that extraterrestrials are responsible for maintaining this purposely, either through some kind of technology that's keeping it melted or through some kind of manipulation of the environment, with not a lot of suggestion as to what would be the purpose of it. Although it seems like the idea is that maybe it's some kind of entrance to something. Maybe there's like an underwater base. It makes me think of a lot of the ultra-terrestrial stories we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It might be just maintaining this space. Like, oh, it's way easier to just keep this melted than to drill through it every time we need to go down.
It could be a spot that they like to enter the water in, like, oh, this is really close to our base. It'd be easier, obviously, even with these, unknown power sources and skills and technologies and stuff, you still would think it would be easier just to travel through air than through water. So they don't have to go underwater for, 15 miles. They can just go in this one spot. Definitely aliens.
Right. The dogs are freaking out upstairs. I'm trying to decide how disruptive they're going to be.
Because this is such a crazy topic. They're like, dude, I've been trying to tell you this for years, but you don't listen to my woofs.
All right. Theory number 2 is that there's a lost civilization under that ice. And that either purposefully to allow, kind of like you're suggesting with the extraterrestrials, either easier egress and ingress, or just by accident. Just by the fact that there's something down there still running, it's somehow producing this effect to keep this, perfectly clear ice-free area. 3, that this is the location of Atlantis or some other mystical type location. Again, one of the things that I don't like about this is there's not a lot of explanation as to why it would be keeping it melted. It's just there's probably something there.
Well, I don't know how they would do it, but if, say, whatever government so-and-so did discover an ancient civilization, and I don't mean one that's still active, I mean ruins and stuff like that, and they're like, oh crap, we need to get all this before civilians like Elon Musk and people like that can actually get to it. We got to clear this out. And we got to do it fast, and we don't, because for whatever reason, I mean, there's different reasons. Like, oh, if we admit that Atlantis is real, then everybody's going to believe every conspiracy theory ever, and they want to keep that hidden, or it kind of throws a wrinkle into human evolution. We got to keep that hidden. So I could totally see a government or a multitude of governments going together and saying, yep, we got to get this stuff, we got to get it out of there, and then we'll let this freeze again. And plus it also helps with our bullshit theory of global warming. Bull stuff theory. I'm sorry, I'm trying to not cuss.
All right, so the next 2 I'll just kind of combine a little bit. Some kind of magnetic field anomaly, since it's at the North Pole.
Okay.
Although it did say it's near the geographic North Pole, not necessarily magnetic North Pole.
Gotcha.
But that though, maybe there's something with the magnetic field in that area that would cause it. And then the idea that maybe it's a time warp or some kind of portal. And that I kind of like. Yeah. I like the idea that maybe it's a time slip or some kind of interdimensional spot where you're not looking at the ice that's supposed to be there. You're looking at something else. You're looking at like Earth 2. And at that spot on Earth 2, there's no ice. And if you were to go in there, maybe it would be different. It wouldn't be, freezing at all. Maybe it's warm.
Wow.
So I kind of dig that. But the thing that got me into this was the USS Nautilus. Now, I knew that the USS Nautilus was the first sub to reach the North Pole in 1958. What I did not know is that there was another one. Sir Hubert Wilkins he had the idea of using a sub to try to reach the North Pole way back in 1913. I mean, and these expeditions go back to, I think, maybe the late 1700s. Yeah. We're talking these I guess in some cases probably photos, but a lot of it's like drawings, paintings, things like that, of like wooden ships trying to ram their way through. Or some of them even were, I don't know, this weird era that I feel like we never really looked back on, where you had wooden hulled ships with engines and stuff in them, kind of in between. Kind of in between, the old sailing ships and the modern steel ones. But I mean, they used all kinds of things to try to get through there. And like we said, the first time that we really reached it was by air. But his idea was it might be easier to get there underwater and then to come up wherever there was a spot that was thin enough or that they could drill through. So during Wilkins' honeymoon, actually in 1930, he was staying at with Lincoln Ellsworth at his Swiss castle in Schloss Lenzburg. Very relatable.
Very, very relatable. Good old Lincoln.
So he started raising money. He put basically all of his personal savings into it, and he started trying to raise money from other researchers and different sources. But the biggest one was Randolph Hearst, because it was going to be a huge media sensation. So they wanted like exclusive information and all this coverage. So they put in something like $64,000, back in 1930s money. And they were going to put in another, I believe it was 150, if he managed to make it in time to meet up with this airship that was going to be there around the same time, so that they could make it this big media event that like the airship was going over and the sub was popping up from the ice. I'm trying to do that calculation real quick. Let me see. 64,000.
It's going to be, in today's dollars, it would be almost $1 million.
Yeah.
984, or I mean, I'm sorry, almost 100. No, almost $1 million. $984,697.
Okay.
Man, that's inflation. Whew. Every time we do these calculations, I'm like, holy shit. That's why, people have to keep working. Like an athlete might make, $15 million in their career, but 50 years down the road, it's not going to be worth much, relatively speaking,
Yeah. It's why, dude, either get gold or invest your money.
Land.
My neighbor just found like $10,000 or something like that her like parents or grandparents had hidden when she was like clearing out some old furniture. She found it like taped into the bottom of a drawer.
Oh,
and it's like,
I got to start checking that at Goodwill.
Yeah. But it's like, imagine how much that money would have been worth if it was invested.
Oh, yeah.
That was probably a ton of money back then. Because I know her, her grandparents grew up during the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's probably why it was there. They probably stuck it there because there were runs on the bank.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody knew it for like 50 years. Anyway, so they had like almost $1 million from Hearst, and then almost 3 times that again if they managed to meet this airship.
Yeah, but also look at how much it would cost to like rent a sub. You know what I mean? It's not like they're like, oh, we've got, $4 million and we're going to get some planes and some dogs. No, it's like if you're going to get a submarine, that's going to take a huge chunk of whatever budget you have. You know what I mean? Like it's I don't know. It just seems like not enough to get. You don't want to get a crappy sub, right? You don't want to be like, okay, well, you can have the ugly duckling over here for $10,000 a day, or you can have the sea wolf for $100,000 a day. You don't want to be like, give me the one. Just put a little bubble gum where that rivet should have been, and we'll be fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, that was not the only investor. There were other investors, but it's funny that you say that because that is what they did. Was they leased a submarine. It was formerly a World War I U.S. submarine called the O-12. O-12, that was his name.
And they got it from Hertz?
No, he released it from somebody else. I don't remember who.
Hertz. It's a rent-a-car joke. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you said Hearst.
Hearst, I got you.
Hertz.
Cut that joke.
You up? Is that their thing? Anyway, so they rented this, they renamed it the Nautilus to go along with like the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea thing that they were kind of playing off of.
Mm-hmm.
And removed all the military armament and fitted it with scientific equipment and safety devices that, in theory, should have worked really well.
Uh-oh.
So one of the things that they did with it, and I can probably throw up some pictures of it, or at least renderings of it, it had a hydraulic shock absorber in the front, because it was kind of like a blade, like a wedge.
Right.
And they reinforced the front of it with extra steel plates and things like that, so that if it hit ice, it wouldn't be a huge problem. And at the top, it had this kind of bulb that stuck out. And that was so if it impacted a large piece of ice, it would hopefully hit, absorb, and kind of bounce it back.
Mm-hmm.
Although Wilkins expressed hesitation at using it because he thought it was more likely that thing was going to get wedged in the ice and get them stuck.
Oh, yeah.
They also put like rails, kind of like an old-fashioned sled, on the top, so that if it were to come up and hit ice and slide along it, it would hopefully, kind of push it down and protect it. And it would have a hydraulic sort of arm. So if the if the sub is going this way, it has this arm that kind of comes up, levers from the opposite direction to push it down and away from the ice.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, they had some really cool innovations that they were trying to use with this thing. I think one of the most interesting ones was it had a drill that would hypothetically be able to drill like 20 feet up through the ice. So that if they were underwater, they could run the engines and charge the batteries. And they wouldn't just be out of luck and out of power.
Yeah. Man.
The problem was almost none of that stuff worked.
Yeah.
There were other things that they wanted. The guy who owned it basically said, nah, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm already helping you out by leasing this thing to you and doing all these modifications. Like, you just got to take what you can get. And yeah,
it seems like stuff I would make up. Like, oh, dude, I'm going to put a drill on the front and it's going to have an arm that comes up and maybe it can transform into a robot. Who knows? And I don't blame the guy with the sub. He's like, listen, bro, this is a freaking $10 million submarine. You're not going to just, pimp your ride and think it's going to be okay. You're going to have to take all that stuff off too. But yeah, it does sound like stuff like I would make up, like we'll put an arm and the arm will push us down. And it seems to me too that it's like if you have to like innovate 100,000 new ideas to make this somewhat safe, maybe it's not the best choice. Maybe you just wait a little bit and see what technology comes up in the next decade or so.
Well, and it seems like time was a big part of their problem because they were racing to try to meet this airship. So they left, not really knowing how well that hydraulic arm worked. They knew that the drill did not work even in its preliminary testing. They knew that it had failed its test. Like, it worked a little bit, but then it would jam really frequently. It was really hard to use. So they went from the U.S. across the Atlantic. And during their Atlantic crossing, both of their engines failed. And I think they were lost and out of communication for like 4 days.
Wow.
Before they were found by the USS Wyoming. Now, some of the sources said that they had sent out an SOS, but what I found was that the people who were kind of stateside for this expedition, who had been in radio contact with them, just lost it. They didn't know where they were. Just, we just haven't heard from them in a while.
Yeah.
But they were apparently going through a lot of storms. The sub was relatively small, especially by today's standards.
No, back then,
be like to be on one of those things because, again, I've talked about going to those naval museums. I've been on World War II subs, and those are tiny and horrifying.
Now, are we talking about diesel engines back then?
Yeah,
because it's not. I mean, with a nuclear sub, that's a whole different ball game. But I would also be pissed if I'm like, dude, I rented or leased your sub and both engines went out.
Yeah. I don't know how that works. I don't know who's at fault. I don't know what their lease agreement was like. But the submarine,
and who knows? They may have been like, if we put jet fuel in there, we'll be able to get across the ocean in half the time.
Well, the sub went for repairs in England, which is where they had planned to stop anyway. And they added some new parts, some spares. They did some other work to it. I know one of the things that they added that I thought was kind of interesting was they had turned the torpedo bays into some kind of like pressurization chamber so that they could send divers or equipment out, which is kind of innovative. I would hate to be the guy who's like, all right, we're going to load you in this little tube.
Torpedo cannon.
And let it fill up with seawater. Let's hope you got all the seals on your 1930s suit correct. But they set off. They left from Bergen on August 5th, but continued to be delayed due to mechanical problems and storms. So they, like I said, they were getting thrown around really easily by storms and underwater currents. One of the first things that happened, an ongoing thing was there was a lot of lead used in the plumbing and in the water systems in this thing. So they were basically being kind of lead poisoned all the time.
Wow.
Their food was bad. So they had like food poisoning was common. Seasickness was really common because of the currents and the storms in the area. And then the bilge pump went out. So all the stuff that should be going out of the sub started to kind of rise up after a while. I don't know how, when, or if that actually got fixed. I found mentions of it happening, but not mentions of like, and then on this date, they got everything sorted out.
Yeah. But
they pressed on and they got fairly far north. All right. So it's horrific to just think about. There were 20 dudes on this boat with one
No
bathroom to
chick.
share. They were all seasick. They were throwing up. They had stomach problems, all this kind of horrific stuff. But they end up, pressing on with it anyway. They were hindered by thick ice. They found that the ship itself was ill-equipped to deal with cold. There were no heaters inside. There was no real insulation except the metal of the ship itself, the hull.
Hey, you know what will get you through thick ice real quick? Torpedoes. I'm sure that, there's international maritime law banning people from just blasting ice caps with torpedoes, but hey, what do I know?
Yeah, they're probably like, we learned our lesson with the Egyptians with this stuff, blowing up tombs with dynamite and things like that.
Yeah.
So apparently their freshwater system froze and the hull started to develop some leaks. And after 10 days, the Nautilus reached 82 degrees north, which was the furthest north any vessel had reached under its own power. And at this point, they decided that they were going to try to dive under the ice and, just see how far they could get under there, which at this point, they were being urged to turn around by pretty much everybody.
It's even a suicide mission.
Even Hearst was publicly saying, like, the airship thing had come and gone. He was like, you need to return. But there is evidence to suggest that privately, there were still messages going back and forth. And he was still saying, like, we had a deal. I invested this much because I wanted you to do this. So he's basically having to decide, like, do I risk my men and my expedition or, my reputation and my financial future and whatever else? So he's saying we're going to dive, we're going to proceed under the ice, but the boat did not respond. The stern planes, the ones that control vertical movement in the back, according to the Wikipedia entry, I like the way they put it, had been carried away at some earlier time. But apparently Wilkins sent a diver to kind of investigate and see what was going on. And that gear was just gone, not there. Now, there is some suspicion that it was members of the crew who sabotaged it because they did not want to keep going. They wanted to turn around. They're like, well, this thing can't go under the ice. And it just stops when it gets to the ice. But what they did was they purposely flooded the ballasts. I think I'm using the right terms. And had the thing submerge in kind of a less controlled way than it should have. And they relied on those runners along the top to just scrape along the underside of the ice. And some of the sources I found said that it would have sounded like the ship was being ripped apart the whole time. So on the 31st of August, under pressure from William Randolph Hearst, and sorry, I just noticed something in my notes that I didn't see before.
I'll allow it. I mean, it sounds absolutely horrifying. I couldn't imagine being a crew member and like you see a little bit of water leaking in and you go and tell the captain, like, hey, dude, there's a leak. You would think the captain would be like, turn it around. We're doing a Mayday SOS, get people out here. But then he's like, we're going to just keep going. It's like, there's water coming in the sub. Like, I mean, if I'm out on a canoe and I find a hole in the canoe that I can't, I don't have a bilge pump, I can't use a cup to get it out, I'm not going to be like, fuck it, let's hit those rapids, baby. I'm going to be like, no, we need to get to the side and figure out what we're going to do from land. It's so counterintuitive, and I can't imagine the terror. And I don't blame these guys if they're like, yeah, we gotta, dude, this guy's nuts. Our leader is batshit crazy. We got to do something to make this thing have to turn around. And then you do that, and he's like, yeah, fuck it. We'll just sink by filling up with water.
Yeah. So remember, the Arctic expedition part of it began on August 5th. So on August 31st, he was being pressured by Hearst, who was basically saying, if you don't complete this, you don't get paid. So he orders the sub to continue scraping along the bottom, scraping along the bottom of the ice, I should say.
Right.
And this was apparently done by deliberately ramming into an ice flow, like to kind of hit and force it down. So they were flooding it with water and forcing it down by ramming it into ice. This unconventional method of submersion caused a lot of damage and caused the ship to be out of radio contact for several days. And it was eventually presumed lost. They were getting ready to, mount a rescue.
Yeah.
And after a couple days, they found that it had resurfaced through another Polynia, so an area of clear open water within the ice.
Mm-hmm.
But when they came up, the radios were too badly damaged to communicate, so it took them a couple days to fix things and actually get the word out that they had only gone, some short distance, maybe like a kilometer or two. It doesn't exactly say, but it's really interesting to me that this guy had this plan and he had this idea for these pieces of equipment that would have made this possible almost 30 years earlier than it actually happened. But because there was so much pressure to make money off it, it was forced along before any of it was ready. The drill didn't work. The bilge pump wasn't up to it. The engines weren't up to it.
Could you imagine being like a military officer, like infantry in World War I, and you're like getting ready to be deployed, and you're like, hey, my firing pin in my rifle is broken. I cannot fire my rifle. I got to get this fixed. And they're like, yeah, you got a bayonet. Go do some damage. Don't be such a baby. Look at the Nazi berserkers on their meth and cocaine and be more like them.
So after this whole thing, the ship was brought back for repairs, but ultimately it wound up being returned to the Navy Department and scuttled.
What's that mean?
Meaning purposely sunk.
Oh.
It was just damaged beyond being worth fixing or salvaging for anything.
Scrapping.
Yep.
That's good to know. They're like, fuck it. Just an entire ship of litter onto the seafloor. Oh, well.
Yeah.
So they survived.
They did survive. Everybody survived, which is not the ending I expected for that when I started reading about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like when I first started reading, it's like 1930s. There was a ship called the Nautilus that tried to make it there. And it had all this really cool equipment that could have worked, that should have worked, but didn't because they were in too much of a rush because they were under a lot of pressure. But there are so many cool ideas with it, and apparently it did produce a lot of scientific data that was brought back, and there were books and papers written about it and things like that. Apparently the guy even wrote a book about the idea of this expedition to help raise money. They just didn't quite make it.
Well, it's sad. It's sad that, human life is, put into a dollar amount when you're talking about something like that. Like, no, I invested too much. I need all of you to risk your lives because of this money. It's really sad. But
they apparently did find areas under the ice which inexplicably had warmer temperatures than they should have had, that you would have expected. So just a little thing that I wanted to mention, there's nothing like paranormal or like unusual that they reported except that. Certain areas under the ice were like much warmer than you would have expected them to be.
It's crazy stuff. I thought we were going to get into some other stuff with Admiral Byrd. So I did look up a couple legends from Inuit and Sami, if you want to go over those, just to give it a little bit of a twist. So I'm going to do my best with these words because, my English isn't very strong. And my Inuit is non-existent. So I'm going to go with Kalupalik, perhaps. So the Kalupalik is a creature that lives in the sea and preys on children who disobey their parents or wander too close to the water's edge. It's said to have green skin, long hair, and long fingernails. And parents warn their children about the Kalupalik to keep them away from dangerous waters. And that's just a quick definition, but it almost sounds like a mermaid. Long hair, long fingernails. Like you wouldn't say fingernails when you're describing an animal, unless you're talking about an ape. So, and then there is the Ejijirak. The Ejijirak is a shape-shifting creature in Inuit mythology that's known for leading travelers astray in the Arctic landscape. It's said to have the ability to appear as someone familiar to the traveler, leading them off their path and into danger. And then there is the Gulan, which is in Sami folklore. And I'm not sure where the Sami tribe is from. But in any case, the Gulan is a creature that combines the features of a cat and a bear. And it's said to have an insatiable appetite and is always hungry, making it a fearsome predator. Its appearance and behavior may be enough to scare children into behaving properly. And
sounds like one to go.
And then finally, in Greenland, we have the Tupalak, and those are creatures in the Greenlandic Inuit folklore created by shamans for various purposes, including revenge or hunting. These creatures are made from bones, hair, and other materials and animated through magical means. Tupalak are often associated with dark magic and may be feared by those who encounter. Are you scared of the Tupalak? Not here.
No, not here. I wanted to make a Tupac joke, but nothing came to me in time.
Yeah, I hear you. That's what I was trying to think of too. I was hoping that I could come
There's a
up with
joke here
something, but
somewhere. Yeah.
no jokes. So in any case, I guess we're ready to move on. Have you heard about the Enfield Monster? So we're talking about tonight the Enfield Monster. Now there's the case of the Enfield Demon that is in Enfield, which I believe is like a village in London, but I know it's in England, and that's kind of like a paranormal poltergeist type case. I think we probably covered it at some point, but we've done so much, it's hard to remember. So this is a mysterious creature that's got a story as puzzling as its name. So what's an Enfield Monster? Well, I'm going to tell you about this tale, and you guys will be scratching your heads. Maybe we will too. But we're going to have kind of a wrap up on this one, and I'm not sure if you guys are going to like it. So let us know. But let's talk about the Enfield Monster. Some people called it the Enfield Horror. So this took place in April of 1973 in Enfield, Illinois, and that is in the southeastern corner of Illinois. And it's a small town. It's not anywhere near like Chicago or anything. So here we are, little old Enfield, Illinois, and boom, out of nowhere, this creature pops up, catching the attention of 3 different people in 1 week. So that's kind of important because we, talk about if one person sees it, is it a delusion? If 2 people see it, is it a folie à deux? And if 3 people see it, is it, what do they call it? Hysteria, mass hysteria. That's what I was trying to think. All right. So you might think, oh, it's just another Bigfoot or Loch Ness monster thing, whether you believe in those or not. But this one is a little different. It's very unique, right? Like we don't have descriptions of Enfield horrors from, Indianapolis or Utah or anything. So this is kind of geographically stuck in Enfield, Illinois, which I think is a little bit telling, which we'll get to. So this creature, as it was described, is said to have been about 4.5 feet tall, and it's got not 1, not 2, but 3 legs. Hence the 3-legged joke at the beginning. So yeah, 3 legs. Its skin is this eerie type of gray, and it has 2 short arms, and it's kind of described as like T-Rex arms almost, but they have claws on the end of it. So try and picture that in your mind. Just close your eyes unless you're driving or something and try and picture this. So it had unique eyes. They're this vivid red, and they're supposed to be glowing. And the way it's described is glowing eyes, not eye shine. So self-illuminating. So does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. So the first encounter, let's just jump into it. So April 25th, 1973, and this dude, Henry McDaniel, rolls up to his house after a day out. So he expects to come home and find his kids playing, whatever, but they are in a panic. And they said that this creature tried to bust into the house while they were playing outside. Thankfully, it didn't go for them. So McDaniel, he decides, well, I'm going to check this out, of course, which any of us would. And he finds, allegedly, these bizarre dog-like tracks nearby with 6 toes on each foot. So that is going to be an issue with my final thought on this. But so allegedly it's dog-like prints with 6 toes on each foot. So keep that in mind. But then he hears scratching at his door. So he's like, oh, what the hell is that? And, of course, he's going to check that out. So he basically kicks the door open, and right there on his front porch is the Enfield horror, which we just described. So what's his first instinct? Slam that door shut and grab his gun. If it were me, and this is, it's in a town area. So we're talking about like a small town. We're not talking about, obviously, like I said, a city, and we're not talking about completely rural where you have, hundreds of acres. And if that were the case, like if you were on your ranch or something and heard that, you grab your rifle immediately, right? That's, you just don't mess around. But he's in town, so he can't just go out and like bust off shots, right? But he does anyway. So he starts shooting at this thing. I believe it was a 22 that he had. But so this thing, is scared by the shots, which even if it's a 22, it's still fairly loud. And this thing just kind of hops off into the darkness. And he said that it let out this hiss that was a mix between a wildcat and a dog. So I've never heard a dog hiss, but I am taking this as he's almost hearing two sounds at the same time, like maybe a growl bark along with a hiss.
Yeah.
So, and that was the end of his encounter. So did you have anything you wanted to add or anything about the first encounter?
No, I'm still thinking about that noise though.
Okay.
But what you said makes sense, that it might sound like multiple animals at once.
Yeah. And, honestly, if there's a three-legged monster hopping along and a dog sees it, it's going to bark and howl. And, a wildcat, I mean, if it gets startled, it might let out a scream and then run off. But in any case, that's how he described it. And, you got to keep in mind, too, that when you're in, basically a panic or a situation that is going to cause trauma for you somehow, things become a little mixed up, right? Like it's not 100% that he was 100% lucid when he heard this, but I don't want to assume, that somebody's like, oh, well, he had 3 beers at the pub, so obviously he hallucinated a three-legged monster, because I think that's total bullshit too. But, we do have to look into, like, if you're in a panic, you may not remember things exactly how they happened. So jumping on. So the second encounter, and this apparently was right after McDaniel's run in, another local who goes by the name Rick Rainbow steps up with his own freaky encounter. And if you're going to look up Rick Rainbow in a freaky encounter, you might want to do that on incognito. So this Rick guy is a radio news director, and he's out investigating these initial reports, and he comes face to face with the beast near this abandoned house. And this thing leaps across the road like it's no big deal, covering 50 feet in just a few bounds. Okay. So it's hopping, and it's covering, 20 feet with each hop. Okay. So that's some serious hops, right?
Definitely.
It's scary, but it's also agile, and that kind of makes things scary too when you encounter something. I mean, obviously we know mountain lions are extremely dangerous and do consider human food sources, and they can jump at you from 20 feet away. They could be 20 feet away, and with one leap they could land on top of, and that is terrifying. So when you see this monster that is almost described as kind of a bumbling creature, and then you're like, oh shit, it can jump 30 feet in one hop. That's pretty scary. But that was the end of his encounter. Apparently, he did not try and follow it and didn't look for tracks or anything like that, which, come on, Rick, that would have been a real help. If you could have found 6-toe dog tracks, that would be a big deal, right? Because right now we have one person that says they found 6-toe dog tracks or canine-like tracks. All right. So May 6, 1973, this is the Enfield Monster's final curtain call, Ryan. Picture this. It's a group of 5 just, young dudes, probably 16 to 18, 19, 20, something like that, cruising through the area because that's what we did back in the day. Now, this was, well before I was born, but uh, when you're kids now, you lay in your bed and look at TikTok. But when we were kids, you went out cruising and found shit to get into. So that's what they were doing. And they run into this creature. It's the same deal as before, about 4.5, 5 feet tall. This time it's covered in gray hair and, yep, 3 legs. So it's consistent with the other sightings to a certain extent. But this time there's no gunfire or showdown. It just ends with no more drama and just a bunch of dudes like, what the hell was that? And so that's when it became the talk of the town. And, it got national headlines too. People from all over that were just curious onlookers and people like us, cryptozoology buffs, all had visited this town. So despite their search parties and efforts, the monster was never found. It never showed its face again. Gone, poof, vanished into thin air. So that means speculation, right? So people were left wondering whether this creature, where it came from, what it really was. Was it an alien? Was it a cryptid? Was it some sort of injured animal? We see dogs that have 3 legs and even some that have 2 that are extremely agile, and they can do, a ton of stuff that you wouldn't think an animal that was injured like that, missing a limb, could do. But that just kind of adds to the mystery. But then the theories start coming in. So you got one group saying it's a case of mistaken identity. Okay. Probably a weird looking dog that got people all hyped up. So then there's the skeptics, and they're pointing fingers at pranksters, thinking they cooked up this whole Enfield Monster thing, just for no reason really, except just to play a prank. I don't know if I buy that one because it seems, I don't know. I don't feel like anybody really got anything out of it. You know what I mean? Like, these kids didn't write a book.
Right. Nobody got
Rainbow,
like a TV show or something out of it.
yeah. And then you've got the true believers, and these are people who are like, nope, it's definitely an alien pet, or oh no, it's definitely a new cryptid that we've never heard of or seen before. And we're talking about people that are just closed to the thought that it could be a hoax or misidentification, which is a dangerous camp to be in, because you hurt your credibility, I think, when you totally dismiss something, whether it's you dismiss it as a hoax or you dismiss it as definitely an alien. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be skeptical to be real. So
you can't just appear to take everything in face value.
Right. And it doesn't matter which side you're on, because most sides may have a point, and there may be some other factors at play in some of these too. But in any case, so obviously you have people that are probably still out there searching for it, even though it's been what, 40 50 years, almost 51 years at this point. So it's it's gotten its kind of spotlight in books, articles, TV shows. I'm sure it appeared in comic books. I'm sure it's on t-shirts and all that stuff. So this legend's going to keep going, and I don't think we're going to find any more information on it. I think what we have now is what we have, unless it pops up again something.
Yeah, it's like any of the goblin stories, or these, or even Mothman in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Some that kind of appeared for a little while and just took off. No pun intended with the Mothman thing, but some that just kind of showed up maybe once or twice, became this huge deal. Because I get what you're saying with in a panic, you may not be interpreting what you're seeing right.
Right.
Could be a
You're
big
working
dog
with your reptile brain at that point. It's like react, fight or flight. This part of your brain up front is kind of like, I'll give you guys, you can control us. Go ahead, reptile brain. You do fight or flight, and I'll do my best to remember.
It turns out that it was actually the guy hissing. And he didn't know what it was because his reptile brain had taken over so hard.
Right. Now, before we move on with this, I do want to give a shout out to BarkBox because we have a monthly subscription for my pit bull, and this month was cryptids. So he got a giant purple Bigfoot with a squeaker in it. He got a jackalope, and he got a Loch Ness monster. And they do have the Mothman in there. And I was going to bring him on the show, not the dog, the toys. But he just destroys them. He hates
Yeah,
cryptids. I don't know what it is, but no, he destroys them. So, but I thought that was pretty cool.
that
So,
is cool. Yeah, and yeah, my brother's got a bulldog Staffordshire mix,
mhm.
and toys
That's probably
last.
a cool looking dog.
He is cool looking, but at best, toys last like 35 minutes with him.
Yeah. Yep.
Like even those Kong toys that are supposed to be indestructible, like he
Mhm.
finds a way.
Yeah, you got to get the black Kongs. Those are made out of like the same rubber that they make like four-wheeling tires out of. But anyway,
Okay.
moving on. Let's talk about the legacy. So this cryptid obviously isn't as famous as like Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, but there are people that this is like their cryptid, right? Like my cryptid is Bigfoot. Well, do you have a cryptid where you're like, I think that could really be real? I would, if I had money, I would go investigate that.
No, I don't think I have one that I would put money on necessarily.
Well, I don't
Um,
mean like that you're betting. I just mean like if Ryan
there-
won $10 million, would you fire up a expedition to find something?
no, there's none that really captivate me that much.
You son
And
of
it's
a
like I would
gun.
have to go after it, even if nobody's seen it in like 50 years.
All right. Well, now we know where you stand. Fine, Ryan. Fine. That's why you're never going to win the lottery. Anyway, so it's strange looks, the mystery where it came from, and the fact that it disappeared after 3 sightings. It's not enough for me to say, yeah, let's go check that out. And especially since it hasn't been seen in 51 years, nobody's going like, hey, we got to go find this guy. So it's cool because it's like, yeah, this little town had this experience over the course of a couple days, and they got to see this thing. I don't think that people are making things up. I guess I need to be clear about that. I believe that the people in this story are being honest. Okay. I don't think that they're hoaxing, and I don't think that they are uh, like intentionally misleading people. Now, I do think that if you don't want to look like a coward, right? So you are going to say, yeah, I fired off at this thing and it jumped away when in, I don't know. I mean, some people might be like, no, I fucking bolted the doors and we hid in a closet or something like that. So but I don't think people are making anything. So
No,
in
I think
any
there's always a possibility that people are maybe being influenced by each other's stories, but in general, most people are honest. They're not trying
Yeah,
to make anything up. They're not trying to pull anything.
agreed.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of ways that we could go with this. One of the suggestions that I did not get into was that it was an escaped kangaroo. So, what does a kangaroo sound like? We'll play it in the episode, so we can just play that audio now. Kangaroos fit the bill because some of them have gray long hair. They have the Tyrannosaurus Rex type arms in the front. They have what appears to look, or could appear to look like a third leg, which is their tail, which they essentially use as a third leg because they do balance on it. It's a tripod when a kangaroo is just standing there. Well, Jay, what about the big red eyes? Well, they have big ears, and the inside of their ears is usually a bright pink. It can be red. And obviously, if you have a dog, you've probably seen an infected ear. Maybe it's with mites or something like that, where it all turns bright red. Now, I know people are going to hate that. And the thing that they're going to bring up is there's no kangaroos in Illinois. True. That's very true. There's no wild kangaroos that were part of a breeding population in Illinois. I get that. but there could have been a circus. I couldn't find anything because it's so long ago about a circus coming through town or a carnival or a zoo in the area. But I do know that there's no wild kangaroos in Branson. I know that. But I went to two places in Branson that had kangaroos in, an area. They were kind of like a little zoo. My daughters were actually able to bottle feed baby kangaroos at one of these places. So I ask you, what makes more sense? Could this have been an escaped kangaroo? It could have even been something that hopped out of a trailer of a circus or something that was passing through. So do you think it's more likely that it was an escaped kangaroo that was misidentified, or that it was a real three-legged alien pet that was trying to scratch at somebody's door? Now, before you answer, I want you to understand, people look at kangaroos and they're like, oh, they're cute, they hop, and they're fun and all that. If you look at like a big male kangaroo, they are buff, and we'll put a picture of that in. But I mean, they look like wrestlers. They have huge pecs, huge deltoids, huge biceps, and then they have the claws at the end. Now, the problem with that is that a kangaroo is three-toed, so it's not going to account for the six-toed tracks unless it was kind of maybe just like moving around a little bit in an area. We didn't get a description of, like, we found six-toed dog tracks, 3, by the way, in a line that were 6 feet in between each step. If we had that, then we might be able to try to help eliminate it.
Right.
But I am going 100% that this was an escaped kangaroo from somewhere. Tell me why I'm wrong, Ryan.
Why you're wrong? I wouldn't say that you're wrong yet. I'm thinking about rich people who keep weird pets. I mean, all these weird invasive species that show up in like Florida that aren't supposed to be there because people keep pets that they shouldn't have. They keep like crocodiles and things as pets.
Yeah. Big snakes.
Or what is it, Hearst Castle? Since we were talking about Hearst earlier, didn't he have like an estate with tons of wildlife on it, like all sorts of things that were not native to the area?
I don't know, but I do know that El Chapo, he had his own menagerie of his own zoo, and when he was being raided, they let the hippos go. So guess what? Now, in some tributary to the Amazon, there are wild hippos that were born in the wild that live in that river. Could you imagine? We showed that Amazon video,
right? Yeah.
But could you imagine, like, you're just going down, like, hey, we're on a float trip, man, and then fuck, why is there hippos? You know what I mean? Or if you saw one hippo in the water, you just saw it, for a couple seconds, and then it dipped under the water, you would be flipping out. You'd be like, what in the world was that? That was some sort of water beast. And then you find out, well, yeah, it's actually worse, probably, because a hippo will kill you just for fun. But yeah, so I'm thinking escaped kangaroo. Sorry,
it makes a lot of sense. And I looked it up while you were talking. Kangaroos do have, even just apart from the ear thing, they do have a red eye shine.
I was going with, because they said they were giant red eyes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do a video where I'll just watch the transformation video that I'm going to send you that you can put up.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, can you think of any other thing that makes legitimate sense than an escaped kangaroo?
No, I mean, one of the thoughts I had was like a large dog or something. And maybe, I mean, I've had dogs where, like, the patterning of their fur is different. Maybe one leg is like black or brown and the other one's white. So maybe you didn't see one of them.
Yeah, it's a good thought.
The kangaroo thing does make a lot more sense, especially the movements, the hopping, the distance it could cover. And the fact that it hasn't been seen again, because if it's just one that escaped, that was not a breeding population, well, it probably won't survive in that area for too long.
Absolutely. And the fact that it really showed no fear for humans kind of shows me that it was probably used to being around them. And
Yeah.
you can't tame a kangaroo, right? Because it is a wild animal, but you can get them used to being around people, accustomed to people, that they don't automatically assume that if they see a person, it's dangerous, that it's trying to hurt them. And in fact, they can be quite aggressive with people. We've all seen the kangaroo boxing that people have done. And
Yeah.
there, now here's the thing: if you have a giant kangaroo trying to get in your house, that's pretty darn scary too. It's even at worst, if this is just a kangaroo, it's still pretty scary.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, kangaroo would be scary enough to open your door to in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Actually, one of those big yoked ones like we're talking about that you see in these YouTube videos.
It is. And I don't think people, the people that are like, no, it's definitely not a kangaroo. I don't know that they've put enough like effort into looking at kangaroo videos, or I mean, that's something I never thought I would say, right? You've not put enough effort into looking up kangaroo videos, but look it up, see what the, scary videos look like and stuff. And I think that you may be swayed a bit. So in any case, that's really all I have on this one. Sorry, guys, that it's not a paranormal explanation like I'm sure everybody, including myself, was hoping to find. But I think this one
I
was
was hoping to find that one.
kangaroo.
Yeah, I was hoping to find that with mine too. More like there's got to be creepy stuff that people report, but for the most part, it's just like horrific conditions trying to go on these expeditions. Byrd was the only one with something unusual, which is a large open area of water with no explanation. And I think probably because he didn't try to say, "Oh, it must be this."
Mm-hmm.
He didn't try to immediately say like, "Oh, there must be something warm under there, or it's used for something, or it's purposefully there." He was just like, "Oh, I've observed an open area with no ice." Like that kind of probably makes it a little bit more credible since he was well known and everything. And it seems like when you find something, if you just report what you found, people accept it. If you try to hypothesize on why it might be there, that's when you get into trouble.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, and by saying that this is a kangaroo, in my opinion, by no means am I 100%. And just because I think this was probably a kangaroo doesn't mean that I don't believe in other cryptids. I just feel like this one is an example of a kangaroo. I don't know, man. That's just what I think. I'm going full tilt boogie on kangaroo. So let us know what you guys think, because that's what's really important. You can do that at cryptiquepodcast@gmail.com. We'll have all our socials in the notes. If you want to like and subscribe and share, that's the best gift that you can give us. So when you see this pop up on your Facebook or your Instagram or something like that, just click share, please. It is a big help for us. And we are having trouble expanding. And we've talked about it before. It's hard to find advertising that actually fits what we do. So our best bet is you guys. We are relying on the Crypt Keepers to try and help us get the word out. And if you want to give a small one-time donation to show your appreciation, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/cryptiquepi. And you can check out our shirts, mugs, stickers, all kinds of stuff at cryptiquepodcaststore.com. I really want you guys, if you're just listening to this episode, check out the YouTube channel. That's at Cryptique Podcast. That's going to have the video version of the show with slides and videos and all sorts of cool stuff that Ryan's been cooking up to, enhance this Cryptique experience. Perfect. So I guess that's all we've got for you. I heard some good advice. How about this? And this doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, but I actually heard someone say, no matter how much you love your possessions, your stuff, your fancy car, your designer clothes, no matter how much you love that stuff, it will never love you back. Good evening, keepers.